CPAC getting ready to address the annual gathering of conservatives for the second time as commander-in-chief and the second year in a row. Welcome to a brand new hour of America's Newsroom. I'm Sandra Smith.
Morning to you.
Good morning to
Happy
you.
Friday. I'm Bill Hemmer. Good morning, everybody. President Trump set to charge up that crowd. He gave a raucous speech about a year ago, and now, more than a year into his presidency, he returns to sell his record of accomplishments. The RNC chair, Ronna McDaniel, with us earlier today on America's Newsroom, saying that he will be a powerful asset on the campaign trail come this fall.
He connects with voters. He says to you, I understand that your wages were stagnant under Barack Obama. He's going to be on the road campaigning, fighting for this comeback and fighting for these majorities because he knows how important it is that we keep America going in the right direction.
Chris Wallace is anchor of Fox News Sunday. He joins us now as we await the president. Chris, what are your expectations this morning?
Well, we got a bit of a preview, Sandra, yesterday from Vice President Pence. First of all, he said that 2017 had been the most consequential year in the history of the conservative movement. And then he went on to lay out a number of accomplishments by this president. The other phrase he used, which is one that you're hearing a lot from Republicans, is promises made, promises kept. And while there have been some setbacks, they failed to repeal Obamacare. There are a number of things that they did accomplish at the end of the year. The major tax cut, and that included the repeal of the individual mandate for Obamacare, a major move in pulling back regulations, the nomination and confirmation of Neil Gorsuch to the Supreme Court, a record number of nominees that were confirmed to the Court of Appeals, the second level of courts in this country below the Supreme Court, and successes against ISIS in Iraq and Syria. So there are a number of things the president can talk about, and we also expect him to announce today a new set of sanctions. They're going to say the biggest ever against North Korea. You know, there's some question we have maybe sanctioned out against North Korea. There's so many things that the U.S. has done over the years to impose sanctions on North Korea, but the president is going to indicate once again that the era of strategic patience is over and that we're going to put pressure after these feel-good Winter Olympics. We're going to put pressure again on the Kim regime.
This speech by the president, this is his second year in a row, as Bill mentioned in the lead-in. It was a raucous speech that he delivered there yesterday. He got this crowd going, Chris. Do you expect the president to go off script here and sort of give us a classic version of himself and tackle a lot of the hot-button issues right now?
I am far too smart to predict what Donald Trump's going to do. That's a losing bet. I suspect that, the speech will have a lot of red meat in it, and he's got a keen sense. He's a great communicator, how to identify with a crowd, how to read a crowd, and if he sees something that he feels is getting people going, sure, he'll do a riff on that. He's very comfortable going off script. But I think this will be, on the one hand, a victory lap for what he's going to say that he and the conservative movement, the people in that crowd, have accomplished in 2017, and a call to arms as to what they're going to try to do in 2018, leading up to this election. As has been pointed out earlier, and Ronna McDaniel, the RNC chairwoman, pointed out, 2018 is a very big election. I mean, this president has been contested by Democrats, and they've been able to block a lot of his initiatives already. If you get Democrats taking control of the House, you get Nancy Pelosi back as Speaker, conceivably, although I think it's less likely, the Democrats taking control of the Senate, there are a lot of bad things that will happen from the president's point of view. His agenda will be blunted. Instead of having Paul Ryan as Speaker, you'll have Nancy Pelosi. Instead of having Devin Nunes as the head of the House Intel Committee, you'll have Adam Schiff. There would be investigations. People would be subpoenaed to come up to Capitol Hill. So they got a lot at stake, both the president and the people in the CPAC meeting, to try to hold on to their majorities in the House and the Senate in November.
And here we are in the last Friday in February. Hard to believe. Timing is going to start getting very interesting for the midterm elections. So perhaps it's not too far off, Chris, to predict that the president's going to take that stage in a few moments and take a bit of a victory lap now that he's returning to address this crowd after he's got a track record and a year under his belt in office.
No, that's right. As I said, one of the lines that's being used, I don't know that he'll use it, Mike Pence did. Promises made, promises kept. There obviously have been some setbacks and some disappointments, but there is a record, and he can run on that record. And obviously, he hopes that a lot of Republicans will run on that record in 2018. You know, Ronna McDaniel was pointing out his strengths on the campaign trail. The fact is, Donald Trump mobilizes both sides. He still has an enormous connection with his base and mobilizing those folks who helped elect him president in 2016, and they are vital to Republicans retaining control of the House and the Senate. On the other hand, he also mobilizes the opposition. There's a reason that you saw in the special election in Arizona in Alabama involving Roy Moore, in the governor's race in Virginia. You really saw a lot of Democrats, women, minorities, young people coming out mobilized. So he's going to be a key figure in this election, both pro and con.
You know, the chairman, Matt Schlapp of CPAC, he made it very clear that Russia is on the agenda there at CPAC. Why? Because this Mueller investigation is ongoing. And here we are. We just chatted with Corey Lewandowski as more charges have been brought against Manafort and Gates, formerly with Trump's campaign. And I wonder if the president is going to address that. Matt Schlapp said the goal is to find out what Mueller has now. It's been over a year. They are owed an answer as this investigation continues.
Well, again, I'm not going to predict what the president will say on that. I'm sure his lawyers will ask him to stay away from it. But we know, we've seen all the tweets, this president genuinely feels aggrieved that this has gone on for more than a year. His frustration is obvious with the FBI. Over this past weekend, he even linked the failure to act on some of the tips about the shooter, Nicholas Cruz, the shooter at Parkland, linked those, and some people would say that has a basis. In fact, some people would say it has no basis, in fact, to all the concentration by the FBI and the special counsel on investigating what he says is a hoax, the idea that there's been any collusion between the president, the Trump campaign, and the Russians. So he obviously feels aggrieved by that. And one of the points they make, you know, yesterday we obviously saw a raft, dozens of new charges in a new indictment against Paul Manafort, his former campaign chairman, and Rick Gates, who was one of Manafort's right-hand men. But one of the points the White House makes, and Corey Lewandowski makes, is that those were crimes that were committed long before either of them were involved in the Trump campaign.
Chris, one of the things that struck me this week is perhaps this president's greatest asset is the way he interacts with people. And we saw that 2 days ago when he sat there at the White House and listened to all those students and the parents, and what a moment that was. And you mentioned the new charges in the Mueller matter. The Mueller matter, Russia, has kept a lid on this president. You know that he would rather talk to reporters and probably conduct the press conferences on his own, and can't because the lawyers at the White House don't want to allow the opportunity to get tripped up in a question, and that has to be a part of their thinking. And you think about the only press conference he really held at the White House. It goes back 8-10 months. Was that moment when he called out CNN and Jim Acosta as, you know, I got a new name for you. You're not fake news. You're really fake news. And if you go back and look at that, the whole room was laughing. Everybody in the media, his aides against the wall, even Jim Acosta was laughing when that came out. That part of this presidency has been sidelined entirely because of this Mueller matter, and certainly that must be a blow to the president, a blow to the White House, and a way of preventing their message from going forth on a daily basis. Just what do you think about that?
Well, no, I think a lot of what you say is right. First of all, that press conference, it wasn't 8 or 10 months ago. It was a year ago. It was last February, and that is the only formal news conference. Yes, he's had these events, and he's going to have one today when he meets with a foreign leader, and they take 2 questions from the American press and 2 questions from the foreign press, and he'll have that today. But the kind of freewheeling news conference that he had at points during the campaign, that he had during the transition, that he had last February, he hasn't been able to have. And I suspect that Russia has a lot to do with that. And as far as his connection with the American people, I completely agree with you that this event on Wednesday, the listening event with the teachers, with the parents, with some of the kids from that high school at Parkland, was extraordinary. As somebody who's covered a lot of White Houses and a lot of presidents, advisors and presidents don't allow themselves to be in situations that they don't know that they can control. And they obviously knew in its highly charged political and emotional situation that they were not going to have control over those students. And we saw it. There was a range from people who said harden the schools, arm the teachers, to some who were crying and saying, how can these people who are demented, who are deranged, how can they have access to guns? So one, he was in a situation he couldn't control, which is very rare for a president. And two, which is even more extraordinary, he allowed it to be broadcast live on national TV, and that doesn't happen ever either. You know, to have that, if you're going to have that kind of uncontrolled situation, you do it behind closed doors. So this is a president who very much likes to be out there. Some people have said, you know, he views every day as an episode of a reality show with him cast as the leading figure.
To that point, he understands how it works. He understands how the medium of television works, et cetera. This is like being a commander-in-chief with one hand tied behind your back. And with these new charges in Virginia yesterday, this Mueller matter could go into 2019, Chris.
Well, and we've also got, which is going to be the key question, whether it's in days or weeks or months, which is whether he's going to sit for an interview. We know that Robert Mueller and his team want to sit down with the president. There is talk, I don't think it's been decided yet, but there is talk that his lawyers are going to advise him to oppose that. Well, if that happens, then Robert Mueller is going to go to a grand jury and get a subpoena. And if the president resists that, that's going to go to the courts, and who knows how long that'll take. So, yes, this is not, for all the talk that we got at the end of last year, of 2017, from some of the president's lawyers, oh, this will be over by Christmas, this will be over by the New Year, this will be over by the State of the Union. This isn't going to be over for a long time. There's no question about it. And it will continue to cast a cloud. Some will say legitimately, some will say utterly unfairly, on this president and his ability to pursue his agenda.
So Matt Schlapp, the chairman of CPAC, is now walking out onto the stage. He will be introducing the president there at CPAC 2018, National Harbor, Maryland, just outside of Washington, D.C. Chris Wallace, as we do await the president's remarks here, as the president is about to address this conservative crowd, how would you describe this president's standing a year in with the conservative movement? And I ask you that a day after Wayne LaPierre, the head of the NRA, gave a fiery speech on that same stage, and it was almost minutes after that the president was at that listening session at the White House and suggested that he is very much open to changing some of the gun laws in this country.
Oh, I think that he's going to be welcomed as a returning hero. You know, look, there may be some differences, and there's a difference on one specific issue with the NRA, which is whether or not to raise the age, the minimum age to be able to buy an AR-15 from 18 to 21, which is what it is for handguns. And they're at a difference on that. But on the vast majority of issues, there is tremendous, they're in tremendous agreement, both the conservatives that'll be at CPAC and the president, and they feel very much that he has pushed and kept faith with their agenda. There was some concern, remember, a year ago as to whether, given his history, whether this president really was a true conservative, whether he was going to keep faith with what he campaigned on. But whether it's the wall, whether it's tax cuts, whether it's Obamacare, a variety of issues, whether it's conservative judges, he very much has kept faith with the people at CPAC. Before I go, may I quickly plug my show, because we're going to have a great show on Sunday.
Please do.
We're going to have Rick Scott, the governor of Florida, who in about an hour is going to announce his agenda for what he wants to see on guns. He gets an A+ from the NRA. It'll be interesting to see what he proposes. Plus, we're going to talk to Andrew Pollack. He is that father who spoke at the listening session. And also Delaney Tarshy is one of the students, but Andrew Pollack was the father of Meadow Pollack, who was gunned down at Parkland, and who spoke about how, you know, after 9/11 we fixed things. Why don't we fix things now? It was a real cry from the heart, and any parent felt that very keenly.
His daughter was 18 years old. Chris, we expect a walkout here in a moment. Internationally, there is a big deal on the Korean Peninsula. You have closing ceremonies on Sunday, and then you get into the Paralympic Games in South Korea. And now the calendar's at mid-March, and the rubber's going to hit the road on this story. And just what is your sense with Ivanka Trump arriving there in South Korea earlier today? James Mattis, the pressure has not let up, despite the fact that sometimes it moves out of the headlines. And the president, all likelihood, will announce publicly these new tough sanctions against North Korea. So then where are we 3 weeks from now?
Well, that's an interesting question, because remember that the North Koreans made some progress when Kim's younger sister came down. She invited President Moon of South Korea up to a meeting in Pyeongchang. And I would think that before the president does much more, I mean, yes, he can announce the sanctions today, he's going to want to make sure that the alliance between the U.S. and South Korea is firm. And he's going to want to see, and I think he's going to want to talk beforehand to President Moon of South Korea to make sure that they're not softening at all in continuing to apply extreme pressure. If Moon goes up to meet in the North Korean capital, Pyongyang, with Kim, and suddenly announces, well, they're lessening some of their economic sanctions, they're going to continue to do business, and that lessens the isolation of North Korea in the world, that's bad news for President Trump. So I think he's got to try to, and I'm going to be quiet because the president's going to come out right.
Chris, thank you very much. We'll see you on Sunday, okay?
You bet. Thanks.
Chris Wallace there in Washington, D.C., and let's take you live to CPAC now. Here's the president.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Matt, for that great introduction. And thank you for this big crowd. This is incredible. Really incredible. We've all come a long way together. We've come a long way together. I'm thrilled to be back at CPAC with so many of my wonderful friends and amazing supporters and proud conservatives. Remember when I first started running? Because I wasn't a politician, fortunately. But do you remember I started running and people say, are you sure he's a conservative? I think now we've proved that I'm a conservative. For more than 4 decades, this event has served as a forum for our nation's top leaders, activists, writers, thinkers. Year after year, leaders have stood on the stage to discuss what we can do together to protect our heritage, to promote our culture, and to defend our freedom. CPAC has always been about big ideas, and it's also been about putting those ideas into action. And CPAC really has put a lot of ideas into action. We'll talk about some of them this morning. For the last year, with your help, we have put more great conservative ideas into use than perhaps ever before in American history. Right? By the way, what a nice picture that is. Look at that. I'd love to watch that guy speak. Oh, boy. Let's see. I try like hell to hide that bald spot, folks. I work harder. Doesn't look bad. Hey, we're hanging in. We're hanging in. We're hanging in there, right? Together, we're hanging in. We've confirmed a record number, so important, of circuit court judges, and we are going to be putting in a lot more. And they will interpret the law as written. And we've confirmed an incredible new Supreme Court justice, a great man, Neil Gorsuch. Right? We've passed massive, biggest in history, tax cuts and reforms. You know, I don't use the word reform. There was a lot of reform, too, very positive reform. I don't use it. And when we were first doing it, I told everybody gathered, I said, just talk about tax cuts. People don't know what reform means. They think reform might mean it's going up. And I said, do tax cuts. Thank you. How did he get in here, Matt? Boy. Okay. Just for the media, the fake news back there. They took very good care of him. They were very gentle. He was very obnoxious. It was only one person. So we have thousands of people here. So listen, tomorrow the headline will be, protesters disturb the trouble. One person, folks, doesn't deserve a mention, doesn't deserve a headline. The headline tomorrow, disruptors of CPAC. One person, and he was very nice. We looked at him, he immediately left. Okay. No, I've had it too often. You'll have one person, and you can hardly even hear. In fact, the biggest really disturbance are you people. You know why? He'll say something, nobody hears him, because it's so. And then the crowd will start screaming at him, and then all of a sudden we stop. And that's okay. You have to show your spirit, right? You have to show your spirit. It's true. So we passed the biggest tax cuts in the history of our country, and it was called Tax Cut and Reform. And I said to our people, don't use the word reform, because we're going to call it the Tax Reform Act. I said, no wonder for 45 years nothing's been passed, because people want tax cuts, and they don't know what reform means. Reform can mean you're going to pay more tax. So I convinced politicians who have done this all their lives, and they do a great job in many cases, but this was one that they were going, the Tax Reform Act of whatever year we want to put, okay? So they have the Tax Reform Act, and that was it. And now it was called the Tax Act, Tax Cut Act, and jobs. We had to add jobs into it because we're picking up tremendous number of jobs. 2.7 million jobs since the election. 2.7. So now people hear tax cuts, and it has been popular. Remember, it started off a little slow. Then it got passed, and we had some great help. I will say we had some great help in the Senate, in the House. We have guys here today. We have a lot of congressmen. We have a lot of senators. We had a lot of help, and we got it passed. It was not easy. We didn't have one Democrat vote, and I think that's going to cost them in the midterms. I know that whoever wins the presidency has a disadvantage for whatever reason in the midterms. You know what happens? I'm trying to figure it out, because historically, if you win the presidency, you don't do well 2 years later. And you know what? We can't let that happen. And I know what happens. I finally figured it out. Nobody's been able to explain it. It just happens statistically almost all of the time for many years. What happens is you fight so hard to win the presidency. You fight, fight, fight. And now only 2 years, that's a very short period. And by the time you start campaigning, it's a year. And now you got to go and fight again, but you just won. So nobody has that same drive that they had. So you end up not doing that well, because the other side is going, they're crazed. And by the way, they're crazed anyway, these people. They are really crazed, right? So, because, I kept trying to say, why is this? But it's just there. So the great enthusiasm, you're sitting back, you're watching television, maybe I don't have to vote today, we just won the presidency. And then we get clobbered, and we can't let that happen. We get clobbered in 2018, and we can't let that happen, only because we are so happy. We pass so many things. Honestly, and I'll use the word my administration as opposed to me. My administration, I think, has had the most successful first year in the history of the presidency. I really believe that. I really believe it. I really believe it. So, I mean, judges, regulations, everything. And the beautiful thing about the tax cuts is nobody thought we could do it. Because, we had to get 100% of our vote. And nobody thought we could do it. And frankly, I mean, to me, we got it, and it's turned out to be one of the most popular things. And by the way, for the Republicans in this room, of which I assume, would you say, is it 99%, Matt, or 100%? Huh? I would hope it's close to, you know what? Hey, we probably have some Democrats that want to come over. We have a great governor from West Virginia that left the Democratic Party, Big Jim, and he came over to the Republican Party. So people are sitting there, and they're saying, oh, we just had that great victory. Let's not vote. Let's go to a movie. The Republican Party, we're going to do great. And then they end up losing. So you got to keep up the enthusiasm. Now what happens, by the way, they lose, and then you have the presidential election coming up again, and you clobber them because everybody gets off their ass and they get out and they work, right? And they work. And they work and work and work. And you end up winning the presidency again. And we should do that. Hopefully we're going to do that very easily. But never, we have to worry. Right now we have a big race coming up in 18. You have to get out. You have to just get that enthusiasm. Keep it going. See, the word really is complacent. People get complacent. It's a natural instinct. You just won, and now you're happy and you're complacent. Don't be complacent. Okay, don't be complacent, because if they get in, they will repeal your tax cuts. They will put judges in that you wouldn't believe. They'll take away your Second Amendment, which we will never allow to happen. They'll take away your Second Amendment. Remember that. They will take away, thank you, they will take away those massive tax cuts, and they will take away your Second Amendment. By the way, if you only had a choice of one, what would you rather have, the Second Amendment or the tax cuts? Go ahead. Second Amendment, tax cuts. Second Amendment. I'm going to leave it at the Second Amendment. I don't want to get into that battle, all right? We're going to say you want, Matt, we're going to say you want the Second Amendment the most. But we're going to get them all. And remember this. Remember this. We've gotten, somebody got on television recently, and they said, actually, this is the first time I can remember, Trump made campaign promises. He may be the only person that actually fulfilled more promises than he made. I think that's true. I fulfilled more promises. But we have a very crooked media. We had a crooked candidate too, by the way. But we have a very, very crooked media. I will say this, folks. Everything that's turning out now, it's amazing. That's come full circle. Boy, have they committed a lot of atrocities when you look, right? How would you look? Have they done things that are wrong? But remember this. Not only did we get the tax cuts, which everybody said we wouldn't get, and by the way, repealed in that tax cut the individual mandate, which is a tremendous thing. This is where you're forced to pay in order not to have health care, okay? Is that great? You pay for the privilege of not having health care. So you're subsidizing lots of other people. That's gone. I know people came up to me with tears in their eyes. They're saying, I'm forced to pay not to have health care. It's very unfair. And by the way, we're having tremendous plans coming out now, health care plans, at a fraction of the cost that are much better than Obamacare. And except for one senator who came into a room at 3 o'clock in the morning and went like that, we would have had health care too. We would have had health care too. Think of that. But I think we may be better off the way we're doing it. It's piece by piece by piece. Obamacare is just being wiped out. The individual mandate essentially wipes it out. So I think we may be better off. And people are getting great health care plans, and we're not finished yet. But remember, one person walked into a room when he was supposed to go this way, and he said he was going this way, and he walked in and he went this way, and everyone said, "What happened? What was that all about?" Boy, oh boy. Who was that? I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. I don't want to be controversial, so I won't use his name, okay? What a mess. But it's all happening anyway. It's all happening anyway. And we've, at the same time, eliminated a record number of job-killing regulations, and people are going back to work. Right? People are going back to work. So, and you know, the fake news always, if I say something that's like a little off, next day headline, he misrepresents. I have to be careful. But in the history of presidents, no president, and I'm saying no president, now maybe they'll find I was off by 2, but we're here 1 year. No president, well, I read it in lots of good papers, actually, but they'll change the story when I say it. No president has ever cut so many regulations in their entire term, okay, as we've cut in less than a year. And it's my opinion that the regulations had as big an impact as these massive tax cuts that we've given. So I really believe it. We've ended the war on American energy. We were in war. And we've ended the war on beautiful, clean coal, one of our great natural resources. And very important for our defense, coal. Very important for our defense, because we have it. We don't have to send it through pipes. We don't have to get it from foreign countries. We have more than anybody. And they wanted to end it. And our miners have been mistreated, and they're not being mistreated anymore. We're doing tremendous business. I was in Vietnam, and the Prime Minister and the President of Vietnam were there. And we have a massive deficit with them like we do with everybody else because these presidents have just let it go to hell. We have the worst trade deals you've ever seen. So we're changing it. So I said, we have too big a deficit with Vietnam. I'm not happy. He said, well, but we're going to, I said, buy coal. Buy coal. They use a lot of coal. Buy coal. And he said, you know, we have bought coal from West Virginia and other places, and it's the finest coal we've ever used. It's interesting. And West Virginia now is doing great. You look at what's happening in West Virginia. You look at what's happening in Pennsylvania. You look at what's happening in Ohio. You look at what's happening in Wyoming. You look at what's happening all over. It's like a different world. And remember this. Virtually as soon as I got into office, we approved the Keystone XL pipeline and the Dakota Access pipelines, which would never have been approved. And we announced our withdrawal from the totally disastrous, job-killing, wealth-knocking out, you know, it knocked out our wealth, or it would have. They basically wanted to take our wealth away. They didn't want us to use our wealth power. We knocked out the Paris Climate Accord. Would have been a disaster. Would have been a disaster for our country. You know, basically it said, you have a lot of oil and gas that we found. You know, technology has been amazing. And we found things that we never knew. But we have massive, just about the top in the world. We have massive energy reserves. We have coal. We have so much. And basically, they were saying, don't use it. You can't use it. So what it does is it makes us uncompetitive with other countries. It's not going to happen. I told them, it's not going to happen. And you know, China, their agreement didn't kick in till 2030, right? Our agreement kicks in immediately. Russia, they're allowed to go back into the 1990s, which was not a clean environmental time. Other countries, big countries, India and others, we had to pay because they considered them a growing country. They were a growing country. I said, what are we? Are we allowed to grow too? Okay. No, are we allowed to grow? They called India a developing nation. They called China a developing nation. But the United States, we're developed. We can pay. So, folks, if you don't mind, I tell you what, it's amazing how many people understood the Paris Accord because it sounds so good. It's like some of the environmental regulations that I cut. They have the most beautiful titles. And sometimes I say, look, I'm just going to close my eyes and sign this because you know what? I'm going to get killed on this one. And I get so much thanks. The country knows what I'm doing. We couldn't build. We couldn't farm. If you had a puddle in your land, they called it a lake for the purposes of environmental. I mean, it's crazy. It's crazy. And I signed certain bills, and I'd have farmers behind me, and I'd have house builders, home builders behind me. And these are tough people, strong people. They've fought hard. They've worked all their lives hard. And there'd be half of them would be crying because we gave them their property back. We gave them the right to earn a living. They couldn't do it. They couldn't do what they had to do. We gave them their property back. We gave them their dignity back. By the way, you don't mind if I go off script a little bit, because, you know, it's sort of boring. It's sort of boring. Got this beautiful speech. Everything's wonderful, but a little boring. We have to, you know, interject. But we gave them their dignity back. And that's why our country's doing record business. We're doing record business. We're doing business. And you have to look at the fundamentals. Companies are pouring back into this country. They're pouring back. Not like, I mean, when did you hear about car companies coming back into Michigan and coming to Ohio and expanding? When did you hear? You never heard that. You hear they're leaving. I've been talking about it for 20 years. I was a private sector guy, but for whatever reason, I always had these guys always covered me much more than anybody else. I always got a lot of these characters. They used to treat me so good, too, until I ran for office. I used to get the greatest publicity. A friend of mine said, you know, you used to be the king of getting great publicity. What happened? I said, well, I have some views that they're opposed to for a lot of bad reasons. A lot of really bad reasons. But when you look at what's happening to our country, it's incredible. And the fundamentals are so strong. The stock market, I just see with all of the ups and downs since Election Day, is up 37% from election. 37%. Now, it did a little bit of a correction. In fact, I started to say, you know, I was in it for like 13, 14 months from election. I say, is this sucker ever going down a little bit? This is a little embarrassing. It was up 100, up 200, up 1,000, up 150, up 90, up 63. I said, good, that's better. You know, hey, we've got 7 years to go, folks. You know, we got a long time to go. So, thank you, everybody. You've been amazing. You've been amazing. You know what Matt didn't say? When I was here 2011, I made a speech, and I was received with such warmth. And they give, you know, they used to give, I don't know if Matt does that because he might not want to be controversial, but they used to give the best speech of CPAC. Do they do that still, Matt? Good, you better pick me or I'm not coming back there. And I got these, everybody, they loved that speech. And that was, I think, Matt, I would say that might have been the first real political speech that I made. It was a love fest. 2011, I believe, the time was. And a lot of people remembered, and they said, we won Trump, we won Trump. And after a few years, I go by and I say, here we are, let's see what we can do. And then everybody said, he cannot get elected. He cannot do it. You need 270 votes. You need electoral college, which, by the way, is much tougher than the popular vote. The popular vote, it would be so much easier. You go to 3 or 4 states and you just go and you just do a great job. Hillary forgot that. You know, she went to these states. I said, what's she doing? Why does she keep going back to California? Crazy. Next time they're going to remember Iowa. They're going to remember Ohio. Remember? They spent a lot of time in Pennsylvania to no avail. They spent a lot of money. They spent a lot of money in North Carolina, the great state of North Carolina. We did very well there. We have a great person in the room, Mark Meadows from North Carolina. He's around here. Where's Mark? Where's Mark? And Deb. And we have Jim Jordan, Warriors all. We have a lot of great people here. But, you know, we hit a chord. And if you remember, 2011, probably that was the beginning of what we've done. And hopefully at the end of a period of time, people are going to say thank you, because it is not easy. We're fighting a lot of forces. They're forces that are doing the wrong thing. They're just doing the wrong thing. I don't want to talk about what they have in mind, but they do the wrong thing. But we're doing what's good for our country for the long-term viability and survival. Like, for instance, $700 billion got approved for our military. Our military was going to hell. We declined to certify the terrible one-sided Iran nuclear deal. That was a horrible deal. Who ever heard you give $150 billion to a nation that has no respect for you whatsoever? They're saying death to America while they're signing the agreement. If somebody said death to America while I'm signing an agreement and I'm president, I immediately say, what's going on here, folks? I'm not signing. What's going on? They just kept going. Kerry may be the worst negotiator I've ever seen. How about this guy? How about, and Obama, of course, he's the one. But how about $1.8 billion in cash? Did you ever see what, like $1 million in $100 bills? A lot of people do it as a promotion. It's a lot. It's big. It's like big. Now take that. Go to $1.8 billion in cash. $1.8 billion. For what? For what? Why did we do this? Why did we do it? Anyway, we didn't certify, and lots of interesting things are happening with that whole mess. But we have to treat people that treat us well, we treat them well. People that treat us badly, we treat them much worse than they can ever imagine. That's the way it has to be. That's the way it has to be. We officially recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. You know, every president campaigned on, we're going to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. Everybody, for many presidents, you've been reading it. And then they never pulled it off. And I now know why. Because I put the word out that I may do it, right? I said I'd do it in my campaign. So that usually means, unless I find something, I'm going to do it. I was hit by more countries and more pressure and more people calling, begging me, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. I said, we have to do it. It's the right thing to do. It's the right thing to do. We have to do it. And I did it. But every other president really lied because they campaigned on it. That was always a big part of the campaign. Then they got into office, they never did it. So I understand why they didn't do it, because there was tremendous, the campaign against it was so incredible. But you know what? The campaign for it was also incredible, and we did the right thing. So we've kept our promise, as I said, to rebuild our military.